Hello and welcome to the Parkinson's Foundation Wellness Wednesday program, Top Strategies to Thrive with Parkinson's During a Pandemic. I'm Nancy Nealon, a community program manager with the Parkinson's Foundation, and I'm logged in today from our New York, New Jersey chapter office in Rochester, New York. All of us would love to know where you are logged in from, so feel free to share your location by typing it into the Q&A box. We'd also like to share with you a few important things about what we do at the Parkinson's Foundation. What we do is, to get started, is to share information and important information about the Parkinson's Foundation. Our mission is to make lives better for people living with PD by improving care and advancing research today until there's a tomorrow without the disease. In everything we do, we build on the energy, experience, and passion of the global Parkinson's community. How we do this is to learn and give you opportunities to learn more about the disease, all the resources that are available. And this is available to you through numerous ways, from educational booklets, our helpline, our website, the Aware and Care Kit, the toll-free web helpline that I mentioned. These are all very much open and available to any of you. So I encourage you to utilize all of these. And one of the important new initiatives that we are launching is the PD Generation. PD Generation is helping us to find out who has genetic connections to Parkinson's. And if you are interested and you want to learn more, visit pd.org/pdgeneration, GENERATION. So thank you for letting me share that information. And now I'm going to ask that we bring up our first slide of the presentation. And I'd like to, in a moment, welcome Amy Chesire. Amy is sharing this beautiful slide with us of Cape Cod. I'm really happy to welcome her back. She was kind enough to participate in our very first generation of these types of programs when we used to call it Take Time Thursday. And she was impressive then, and I'm sure she will be even more impressive now. Amy's education background is that she earned her MSW and also her master's in gerontology from the University of Southern California. She's also a graduate of the University of Rochester's postgraduate family therapy training program. And she is a New York State licensed clinical social worker. Amy's career in Rochester began 28 years ago at the University of Rochester Medical Center in the neuropsychiatry unit within Strong Memorial Hospital. In February of 2000, she joined the Movement Disorders Division at the U of R, and that's where she continues to serve with much passion today. Again, Amy, many thanks for joining us today. Before I officially do the handoff to you, we talked about we wanted to get input from our audience. So we are going to launch the first slide, the first poll for you. What have you found to be most challenging during this time of COVID? And you can choose as many as you like. So feel free to start voting if you have been feeling more isolated or less active, experiencing increased anxiety, not being able to see your friends or family as often, Amy, I think there's probably others that we just didn't have room to list.
And I was checking off my own on this.
Okay, that's true for all of us, absolutely. Okay, so the results so far, which will, I think, help us and help Amy in this, being less active, boy, that is so true. And I know that's going to be part of what you have to say today, Amy. So thank you for sharing all that. But second to all of this is, what have you found to be some of the silver linings of this time? For many of us, I think we've all become a bit more skilled with technology, like attending all these Zoom meetings. creating shopping habits now, because when we go to the store, we have to make it really intentional. Some people have told me that they've been in touch with relatives or friends they hadn't heard from in years. Others are experimenting with new recipes. And once again, another situation where, Amy, can you think of any that we didn't include that maybe you have found as a silver lining?
Well, I'm definitely going to probably talk more about that. So,
okay.
Yeah, I didn't call
All
them
right.
silver linings, but something
Okay.
along those lines.
All right, so we're going to see the results here. So the top vote getters, the technology, that is fantastic.
Wow.
Because that means helping us keep connected with you. And new
Yeah.
hobbies and interests, fabulous. This is great.
That's
Excellent.
Great.
Okay, so Amy, at this point, I'd love for you to start sharing your screen. We will end
Okay.
ours, and you will be able to start yours. And this will be the official handoff to your presentation. So thank you so much.
All right. All right, I am thinking maybe you're not seeing my slides.
Nope, we're seeing them. Oh, I'm sorry, is that your desktop? Is your PowerPoint open?
Yeah, I think I might need to switch over to you guys.
Okay, that's not a problem. So just give us a moment here to do the switch. And in just a moment, Amy, here we go.
Okay, all right, sorry about that.
No problem.
Speaking of technology, there you go. So thanks everybody. It's great to be here, and I always appreciate the opportunity to kind of share a little bit, from experience and some ideas about. There's so much. COVID obviously has been an incredibly challenging time for all of us, and a lot of focus has been on all the nuts and bolts of the pandemic, which of course are super important. So I was really glad when I got asked this opportunity to try to talk about the pandemic and dealing with the pandemic when you have Parkinson's, trying to come from a little bit more of what people often call more of a strengths-based approach. So instead of looking so much around the negativity of it all, but to try to kind of have a conversation that hopefully puts people feeling a little bit more confident about maybe some of these things that they can try that I'm going to talk about in the next half hour or so, that maybe hopefully will help you feel a little bit just overall better about your ability to manage yourself, to manage folks around you, and certainly to try to manage Parkinson's throughout COVID. So this is kind of my first slide. I actually used the same slide during that first talk that Nancy was just referencing. And I brought this up again because if you look at this, it's obviously three different kind of zones. And the question was asked, this was developed very early in the pandemic, probably around by late March, I want to say this started first kind of popping up. And actually our chairman of the Department of Neurology actually shared this with us at one of our very early kind of COVID meetings. So I think that in the early days that a lot of people were in that kind of early fear zone, right? Where I'm talking about March, April, maybe into May, where there was so much uncertainty. People really didn't feel like their emotions were out of, the normal range. People were still really feeling like resources were scarce and worried about being able to get their medications, and just really, high anxiety, high fear, because so many of us didn't know what to expect and what lies ahead. So our hope was that as time was going forward, and as we entered into the later months of the summer, that people hopefully started moving more into this, what they kind of call the learning zone. So overall, we were learning more about COVID. We were learning more about maybe we didn't need to hoard resources as much. We were starting to better understand how the virus, was spread, how it was impacting us, not just the infection, but starting to really understand how this was now affecting us kind of overall. And so that learning zone, I think, has been, and many people are probably still there, which is perfectly fine. There's no right or wrong with any of this. But my hope is that now, as we are, 9 or 10 months into things here in the beginning of November, that we have, ideally anyways, if there is an ideal, started to move towards this outer ring on here. And this is a lot of what I'm going to focus today on. Really kind of, they call it a growth zone. Again, that's a little bit more kind of optimistic way to try to look at this. But hopefully if people have gotten to this point, and we'll talk about some, strategies here to help, but that this is a big focus that we hope people are moving towards this growth zone. If you're way back in the fear zone, don't panic, okay? And I don't think this is you go from fear to learning to growth and then you're done. It just probably doesn't really work that way. But this is just to kind of give you kind of a broader sort of perspective on it. All right, next slide. So if you want a lighter way to look at this, this is a lovely early quote. I'm either coming out of this quarantine 20 pounds lighter, my chakras nicely balanced, and a house full of completed craft projects, or 20 pounds heavier with a nice drinking problem. So 2 different ways to kind of look at the ongoingness of the pandemic. So I'm going to start with, originally, I wanted to identify kind of 10 sort of strategies to help people to thrive. And actually, as I got into this, I was starting to get kind of stressed, realizing that maybe I'm just going to come up with actually 8 of these. So I think I ended up closer to 8. And they aren't necessarily in order of importance, but this one certainly is. So I'm going to start with sleep. And in particular, this title, this is from an article that came out a while ago, actually, I think it was late last year, which was eye-catching. The title of this medical article was called A Rinsing of the Brain. And it was all about how we were really trying to understand. Now, this was an Alzheimer's disease, and I recognize we're talking about Parkinson's disease. All these diseases are a type of neurodegenerative disease. So we can learn a lot from our colleagues that are dealing with other types of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease, as well as they can learn from us in Parkinson's disease. So sometimes it's very nice to sort of cross over and look into the impact, because at the end of the day, we're talking about brain kind of health here, right? And so the importance of sleep, this is something that really is becoming, as we better and better understand the role of sleep, in particular related to people that have, some type of disease, whether it's Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's disease, how critical sleep is. We have some phenomenal sleep researchers based here at the University of Rochester who provide some really good insights into us about what's going on with sleep. And the way I put some highlights here about, why is it so darn important? Well, a couple of things. One, sleep should be something that's in your control. Okay, and that's kind of a little bit of a common theme throughout this talk. You'll probably start to see is that it's all about trying to get control of what you can and basically learning to let go of those things that you can't. And so sleep, I feel for most of us, is very much something that is in our control. And what we know is that it seems to be basically the time that your brain is kind of emptying out kind of all the trash that's sort of accumulated during your day. And so the analogy I sometimes give to families and patients is, let's say you decide tomorrow, you know what, I'm not really going to empty the trash at my house at all for the next month, right? And so, of course, it probably wouldn't take too long before your house is going to become filled with garbage. And it seems to be somewhat similar when we're talking about our brains. So if you're going night after night and not really getting good, it's not so much the length of your sleep, but the quality of your sleep, right? And so if you're going many nights with not having good sleep, feeling super tired, when you first get up in the morning, feeling not rested, by later in the afternoon, feeling very tired again. This is the thing that you can't go back and get your sleep again, right? And so I think just understanding how important it is to try to set yourself up and set up your environment so that you can get a good night's sleep. It's going to help you with your thinking and with your cognition. These are all things that don't involve taking another medication, don't involve having side effects. So really, if I had to where do I focus a fair amount of my energy to stay well during the pandemic in particular, but anytime, it's going to be in this category of sleep. So these are some tips about strategies to kind of, you can see on here, I have the third one down, create a COVID-19 free time prior to bed. So in particular, I think that time leading up to bed, whether that's an hour, hour and a half before, it's probably not a good time to be having a lot of information coming at you that's around the pandemic or having to do with what's going on with the pandemic, to really try to have that as sort of your free zone from not absorbing, whether you're reading about it, seeing it on television, streaming it, on a computer, but to really have that as kind of your free zone so that that's not kind of the last thing your brain is kind of absorbing when you're trying to, again, maximize your sleep. Again, kind of aiming for a consistent schedule. In some ways, this is a little bit easier, maybe related to Parkinson's, because medications are so timely and tend to be hopefully quite consistent. But you don't want to see big swings in your sleep schedule. This is a little more challenging for folks that are working, who tend to maybe have different sleep schedules on the weekend. But all of the sleep folks will tell us to try to be as consistent. The other thing is that it's so different for each person how much sleep you need. Even though there are broad recommendations from 7 to 8 hours or so, at the end of the day, it really comes down to each person about how much sleep they need to have. They say one of the best ways to figure that out is where you really aren't needing an alarm clock to get up, just to figure out what's kind of the natural time that my body kind of starts to wake up. But it's going to be so different for each person. Really keeping the bedroom a sleep-only zone, that kind of helps train your mind to know, okay, when I'm here in the bedroom, this is what I'm going to be doing. That becomes more challenging when you're sharing, I think, your bed, obviously, with someone. You hope to try to get them on the same, or at least to understand the importance and to have some kind of compromise about really trying to keep, have room darkening shades to keep it at a rather cool temperature. All these things kind of make the kind of perfect sort of cave-like conditions to help. The other big thing is if you find yourself not being able to get off to sleep, this is one of the common recommendations, is don't sit there and toss and turn. Because you're just then starting to tell your brain, I can't sleep, but you're laying there in bed. So usually the suggestion is to actually get up, try to do something different that isn't going to be overly stimulating, but is going to get you out of bed and in that tossing and turning. And then hopefully you'll be able to return back to bed when you start to feel a little bit more sleepy. So that is sleep, super important. All right, next slide. So stress, right? I wanted to highlight a number of things that we are coming to better understand about stress related to Parkinson's, in particular, then how the stress of the pandemic seems to be impacting people with Parkinson's disease. And again, we are more coming to better, we certainly didn't understand this, I don't think, definitely in that early fear zone period, into the March and the Aprils, didn't really have a sense of this. It's only been as the months have gone on and people are dealing with it with Parkinson's, coming in, talking to their doctors, completing surveys online to groups like the Parkinson's Foundation, and really giving us some input about what's going on, not only as a human dealing with the pandemic, but as a human that has Parkinson's disease. And so why does it seem so much worse or potentially harder, I should say, for people with PD? And one of them we definitely know is that, the big thing, right, obviously that's going on with people with PD is they're losing their dopamine, right? This really feel good neurotransmitter that we all rely on very heavily. And so by that kind of, this is a fancy way of just saying that the dopamine depletion that's going on with Parkinson's tends to make it a little bit hard, not impossible by any means, but a little bit harder for folks with Parkinson's to be as adaptable or as flexible sometimes. And when you're under stress, and in particular kind of distress or really kind of toxic stress, like the early days of the pandemic and the ongoing days of the pandemic, I think that's just saying that it may be harder for you as somebody living with Parkinson's to be able to learn how to adapt. It's like you're not quite as pliable, okay, as perhaps you used to be. I'm talking not only in your thinking, but also obviously physically what's going on with you. And we know that this kind of chronic stress now of the pandemic seems to be perhaps worsening people's motor functioning, right? So whether their tremor is getting a little bit more activated or they feel like they're really slowing down with their walking, if they're feeling perhaps even much more stiffer, that the role of the stress related to the pandemic seems to, or it can, doesn't mean it will, but it seems like it might be worsening people's motor functioning. So that's not a simple symptom of your Parkinson's moving along. This is more this impact potentially of this extra stress related to dealing with these many, many months of COVID. And the other thing interesting that it seems to potentially do as well is maybe then, because of the stress, actually reduce your response to your typical Parkinson's medications, all right? And we're still, kind of grappling and understanding this as time's moving along. But I think as somebody living with Parkinson's disease, that it's hopefully helpful to be aware of this potentiality that but is being brought up by the stress of dealing with the pandemic. So these are some strategies. Again, we're trying to kind of talk about the issue, but then more importantly, try to come up with ways to try to be of help. The first one, breathe, okay? This seems incredibly easy thing to say. It's remarkable, though, how many of us are what we call very shallow, more panic type of breathers. And so learning really some very, very simple strategies about trying to breathe and to breathe deeply can really go a long way in helping to kind of keep down some of that toxicity and some of that daily stress. So for example, if you're, in the middle of your morning and you're just feeling already pretty overwhelmed, if you have the way to be able to sit down and just to do some very 3 kind of deep, actually not from your belly, but actually more from your waist actually, and really do try to focus on taking some 3 very deep breaths and a very, very slow exhale. We know that that's a great way to just calm down your nervous system, right? So something definitely you can use anywhere in any situation when you're feeling super stressed. You do want to try to, as I said, stay on top of your PD game. What does that mean? This is the time to be as consistent as you can with your medications. Of course, that's always important, but I think really, people wax and wane with this, which is normal. But during this time, because of the added stress, this is the time to really be trying to do everything you can to be taking care of your Parkinson's, whether that's through your medication or other things, but to really be very mindful of this is the time to really try to stay on top of that. Talking with other people, of course, is a great way. Writing down what you're going through. Of course, sometimes for a lot of people with PD, writing becomes compromised. So if there are other ways to kind of get those feelings out, that's a huge godsend. The other big one is actually to go outside. Okay. So we know from a lot of our sort of mental health research, like going outside, when I say go outside, okay, literally this can be just for 2 to 3 minutes. It doesn't have to be anything super involved. You don't have to try to drive somewhere and that kind of thing, but just being able to basically shift from your indoor environment to your outdoor environment. It talks to a different part of my brain. It helps me to know, like, I'm outside now, I'm breathing air. Just simple strategies like that we're just trying to find ways to kind of lessen the stress of the pandemic. And obviously the pandemic's kept so many of us indoors, that finding simple ways to go outside is really, really super important with your stress. And again, kind of finding other ways to get some of those stressful feelings out is super important. All right, so next, so we've talked about sleep, we've talked about stress and kind of stress management. Now we're going to talk about gratitude practice. And a lot of people throw this term around and maybe don't think so much about it. But again, a lot of our kind of research in this area is really starting to show some interesting patterns around gratitude. And so I put on here, it really is a practice. I know people don't think it's something that you should have to work at, but the reality is that, and I don't know that you have to work at it, that's why I like the term practice, but it is something that you have to be aware of in order to kind of practice it and to do it. And so this runs the gamut. I put up here some suggestions about it, some that are relatively simple, some things that may work for you. Maybe some of you are already hopefully doing this and you have some of your own great ideas to share, which would be wonderful. But I put up some of these that I recommend to really write down on some kind of sticky note, really a couple of things that you are quite grateful for, and to really post that. And again, not online, but I mean, you could do it online, but this is really to serve as a visual reminder to you. So someplace where you're going to see it every day. And again, you're getting that visual input about reminding yourself of what you're grateful for. If you can't do it, hopefully someone else can write it out for you, or if you have a nice grandchild that can draw you a picture of it or anything like that. Again, you just want your brain to be getting that visual stimulation and that reminder of, this is what I'm grateful for. As you know, maybe as hard as this morning is going, I go in though and I brush my teeth and I can look up and I can see this reminder of, oh my God, I'm so grateful that, I live in this wonderful neighborhood, or, I belong to a great church, or whatever it might be. It doesn't matter. It's just something that you're very grateful for. And the other term that I like to and encourage people to think about is what I call be a researcher of good. And what does that mean? Basically, that means to really try to watch yourself as you're kind of going through your day. It's very easy for all of us, because the way we're sort of programmed, to focus much more on the negative and the things that aren't going so well. So this is really trying to be aware of searching out things that are going good, things that you notice that are going well, and to really kind of shift your thinking more into being kind of a researcher. You're looking for the good, whether that's in a situation, whether that's even in the pandemic, whether that's even in what's going on with your Parkinson's, but to be more looking for the good instead of all the bad, right? The other big thing around gratitude that goes along with meditation as well is staying in the present, right? And I think this has become really critical during the pandemic. And it really, again, is a practice. And in particular, I think I hear from my folks with Parkinson's that it's very easy to start worrying a lot about the future, right? And what lies ahead for me and what's going to happen. And is my medication always going to work so well? And am I going to get COVID? Or if I do, am I going to get really sick? All these thoughts, right, that just kind of flood us, okay? One of the ways to try to manage that is to try to stay in the moment, okay? And actually staying in the moment is way harder than most of us think, because I'm afraid our society is really not set up to help us to stay in the present, right? And so you really, again, have to kind of catch yourself to try to be able to do this and to do it successfully to help you to manage during COVID. One of the ways is sometimes I have folks, they wear literally a rubber band around their wrist. And every time that they start to feel like they are going down that path of worrying about the future, getting much more away from the present, they can just kind of pull on that rubber band, not super hard, but it can just be, again, kind of a reminder to my brain and to my nervous system, I got to try to stay in the moment. That's all any of us have. I'm going to try to stay in the moment again. So just something to think about. The other thing is random acts of kindness, in particular, things that people don't know that you are doing. These kind of random acts of you just doing something, it can be something very benign, very little. We know these are really great ways then to help continue to practice being grateful. And it kind of gets you out of thinking so much about yourself when you're really trying to do something that's completely random for somebody else. So that's gratitude. Now the big one is about control, okay? And I talked about this earlier, and I share this a lot when I see folks that are dealing with Parkinson's, is on this outer ring is, these are all the things that really are out of our control. And they're obviously, you can see, related to a lot to COVID, from things like how other people follow social distancing, what other people are doing, other people's motives, how much toilet paper is at the store. I noticed that my Wegmans still doesn't have a lot of toilet bowl cleaner the other day. These are all things that are just like out of my control. And so it's learning, again, to really try to decide, first of all, what's in your control, and then to be very aware of what's out of your control. And so that inner circle is super important. These are the things, hopefully, that you will try to focus on because, again, they're in your control. Like I talked earlier about sleep, these are kind of other things that fall into that category, and identifying for you what of these you really feel like are in your control. Typically, things we can control are our thoughts, our actions, so what we do, our attitude, a really critical one that often gets kind of short-sighted, especially when it comes to Parkinson's disease, and also your effort, how much effort you're putting into whatever it is. Those are kind of the broad 4 categories of things that generally, even late into Parkinson's disease, those things are something that you can control. And so this dials down into some specifics. It talks a little bit, you can see, about kind of positive attitude, turning off the news. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And really trying to find fun things you can do at home, and sort of, again, your own sort of kindness and grace. So it's going to be different for every person, but to really focus in on these are the things I can control. And maybe you won't have this many. This is a fair amount. Maybe your list is 3 things, and that's perfectly fine. But to keep reminding yourself, these are the things I can control. Other things that I can't, I have to try as best I can to find a way to let go of those. So super important. All right. Next. So this is a huge one in terms of a way to help us all to be getting through this, in particular folks that are dealing with something like PD, laughter. Because like I talked about in the beginning, and certainly in the heyday, in the early days of COVID, it was very serious. There was a very serious tone to it. There was a lot of fears. There was a lot of hospitalizations. There was a lot of deaths that were happening. It was a very serious time. And that thread, of course, has continued as the pandemic has continued on. One of the ways to try to help deal with that is to try to remember about the lighter side of things and finding a sense of kind of relief or reprieve, if you will, from COVID. And one of the great ways to help, in particular, kind of fend off the loneliness, and I know this was one of the poll responses was, right, being cut off and not being able to see family and friends. I'll talk about some ways to help with that, but also one way is it's amazing if you've ever had a really good laugh or been laughing, like where almost you're crying, kind of laughing, just what that does kind of for your overall system, and particularly your central nervous system. So finding ways to incorporate laughter and joy in things has become, I think, even more critical as the months are wearing on with COVID. So these are some things, to search out. If you find yourself watching a lot of serious shows or documentaries, or the news coverage around COVID, I know this has been kind of a chronic suggestion. I encourage people to kind of find your dose, as I call it, of news. And that's going to be different for everyone. How much helps you, and then when does it start to work against you? And so whether that might be 5 minutes a day or, an hour, just finding what's the right dose for you where you feel like you have the information you need, but you don't have all the information that you really don't need, and that's not going to help you to stay well mentally. So finding that dose, which is going to be different for each person. A suggestion of a newer service that's come online, people may or may not heard about, is actually called Comedians on Call. And this is actually started by these 2 lovely ladies here on the screen who really recognized, this was in the early days, they're based down in New York City, that when seniors were really, kind of definitely in that shutdown mode, when outreach workers were going and trying to check in on seniors, the thing they were hearing is that a lot of seniors were asking them, can you tell me a joke? Do you know a really good joke? Do you know anything that's really funny? And so this kind of sparked this idea then of developing these, this is all volunteer run, volunteer comedians. The number is on there, and we'll get you the resource to their website. And basically what you can do is that if you want to get this for yourself, for a senior, you call them up and they set up a volunteer comedian then, and you're on the line with a couple other seniors at the same time. And they basically do a comedy show. This is all over the phone only, because they really wanted to keep it low tech and make it available to all seniors wherever they are. So just another kind of unique way that the pandemic has brought about, some laughter and some lightness to, in particular, older adults, people that are dealing with Parkinson's disease and other diseases, to try to remember about the laughter and what that can do for you. So super important, laughter and joy. So next, keeping engaged and keeping connected. Like I said, we could see from the poll that this was an area that people got pretty hard hit due to COVID. And I like this quote over here, that the human brain is wired for connection. Okay, it's sort of wired in to our DNA to be connected. And what happens when something like a pandemic comes swooping in on all of us is that we kind of get rewired to kind of move into protection mode, right? And to protect ourselves from this impending threat. And unfortunately, one of the ways that we've really had to do that is this idea of getting so distanced from other people, in particular people that we care about and that care about us. So finding creative ways, and I know people, I put up here just a couple of strategies here. How do you keep, safely, of course, engaged and connected? So in particular, this bottom one, this is actually me with my dog Ranger. But a lot of the research around pets is really interesting. And so this is a way to really kind of keep you connected. It's also helps with your blood pressure and some other things to really, if you have a pet, to really a nice way to keep connected if you can't keep connected to other people per se. Again, getting outside in whatever shape or form is a way actually to get you connected with nature, right? Not necessarily people, but again, a great way to keep you connected with the natural world. And again, I heard people talk about getting really skillful at technology, which is the center picture here of this couple, Zooming with family members. And I know that people have found a lot of great ways to do that. I know people are also having some Zoom fatigue. I'm having some of that myself. So actually also kind of getting a little bit of a break from that. And using a good old-fashioned telephone for people that don't know that with a cord there, when you need a break from some of the technology and really need to try to feel that connection of a more natural human voice. In the middle there, that's Dr. Fred Marshall, one of our beloved neurologists here. Just to kind of give that whole idea of all that personal protection gear and how that really kind of made things, I think, harder for people to keep connected. I know some of my patients who I've only met for the first time since the pandemic went on will often say to me, because we're wearing all this PPE, gosh, if I saw you at the local store, I'd have no idea it was you because they've only seen me, in this kind of PPE. So it's just a reminder about how that also kind of has an impact on us in terms of engagement. Picking up new hobbies, I think that was another one that was on the list. People have done a lot of creative things. This gentleman, there's actually an organization that will create a puzzle of your family, which one of my patients had told me about. And these can be up to like 20 pieces or like 2,000 pieces. And it's been a great way. They had one of their family members took a family portrait, had it converted into a puzzle with many, many pieces, and then provided that to their dad with Parkinson's disease. And he's really enjoyed it. So you're working a number of things there. And hopefully it's enjoyable too. So new hobbies and skills, great things. The bottom picture, which is creative way. This is a visit in a nursing home. Because obviously that's another segment of folks that got hugely and continue to get hugely impacted by this isolation. So I know the nursing homes are trying their best for some creative visits. That's just an example down there. She brought her dog too as well. All right, so moving along. Activity. I know people said that this is something I think that they use to really try to cope and find new things to do. So the thing around physical activity that I really try to drive home to people is, we have all these wonderful suggestions, which are great and important. But at the end of the day, it has to be something that you enjoy doing, whatever it is. And that is just really what's most important. Because of course, if you don't enjoy doing it, you're not going to be doing it. I put on some general suggestions if people, you don't even need to shoot for these, but just to be aware of them, I think is helpful. Again, I'm mindful of not putting more pressure on people when they're already feeling under a lot of pressure. But we also know the huge positives, especially for Parkinson's disease, the role of physical movement and how important that is. So whatever shape or form, and just trying to be as consistent as you can is what's really most important. All right, so to deal with some of what some people have called the hidden sorrows of COVID, or what is kind of considered sort of the COVID fatigue, these are some of the things that people need to be mindful of if they're not already. There's a lot of new normals that are having to constantly get reset. And, you know, to be aware of if you are experiencing uptakes in depression, and sometimes, as we call it, its roommate, which is often anxiety. They kind of cohabitate sometimes together. To be aware if that's going on and to not hesitate to reach out sooner than later, of course, to try to get help with that. This idea, this kind of Groundhog Day syndrome, this is what I hear a lot about my patients every day. Seems like the same day, right? And it's just over and over again. So that sense of kind of dullness that can sort of start to weave itself in and kind of sort of suck your energy out. Again, finding some of those creative ways to try to deal with that can be minor things, but just small things can help you to not feel so much of that constant chronic kind of dullness. And feeling guilty. This is another thing that doesn't get talked about too much, but I had one of my Parkinson's caregivers, her husband has Parkinson's disease, telling me rather sheepishly, like, she hasn't really been that impacted by COVID, right? And she's actually kind of feeling, I think, a little guilty about that, you know, and not really having a space to talk about that. So that's also the other side of things. Everybody's been impacted or not impacted in different ways. And it's okay to feel the other side of it too, that maybe COVID has worked out for you in some ways. So there is always that other side of it that doesn't get a lot of press. So I think it's important to recognize those feelings. They're not wrong or right. They're just what you're experiencing. So some strategies to help. Again, the best kind of antidote for anxiety is really helping somebody else out. Okay. Our medications can be certainly very helpful. But also a lot of these things of really trying to see if there are ways to help other people out can kind of get you out of that kind of chronic sense of anxiety. Mindfulness techniques. These do not have to be elaborate or complicated, right? And they probably shouldn't be. Most of what we know about mindfulness is really if people can, again, kind of think about a practice. Ideally, if you can shoot and get in 20 minutes for at least 6 months, that gives you a really good chance of whether or not this is something that is going to be helping you. But even shooting for like 8 minutes a day, or even if it's 1 minute a day, that's fine. And finding the goal with mindfulness, which took me a while to figure out, it's not to become a good meditator, okay? It's really to be able to take what you are learning during meditation and use that throughout the rest of your day to stay present with people, to be able to quiet your mind down. This is really a practice that phenomenally can be very helpful, both with anxiety and depression. And I have some resources at the end to help you with that. Staying connected with your medical providers. We want to hear from you. We really do. Okay. And certainly if you're struggling around any of these type of mental health issues, to reach out for counseling support. You can always call the Parkinson's Foundation helpline. They are phenomenal to get you pointed in the right direction as well. So some last kind of thoughts here. I love this analogy. A physician that was giving a talk about COVID a week ago in long-term care used this, so I kind of stole it from her. But learning to cope with this pandemic is like trying to build an airplane while flying one. And I think that is probably a really good display of the impact of just how hard all this has been for all of us. And it's really a great opportunity then to try to, one, be kinder to all of us, to really experience some compassionate kindness, because we are all in this for the first time. We are all continuing to learn all of this. And so it really is quite that kind of big challenge. And speaking of that, I wanted to share a poem that was actually an anonymous poem that was submitted to our chair of the Department of Neurology here at the U of R. So I just wanted to read it to you because I think it's hopefully a nice wrap up of things. Remember to be a bit more patient, a bit kinder, a bit more loving, and a bit more understanding, because we're all in this together. I cannot get through this without you, nor you me. So I offer you my hand to help, my ear to listen, my shoulder to cry upon, and my arms to share your load. If I complain today, please do not mark me as a complainer. I just haven't found someone to ease my load. If I seem impatient, please be patient with me. I'm just tired, and self-care is difficult when so many are relying upon you. Please don't look at my shortcomings, but instead look at my potential. I'm loaded with it. We are needy. We need laughter, joy, family, comfort, friends, peace, and love. We need each other. So that kind of nicely wraps all of that in, and I think it's a nice poem for people to maybe even post or keep somewhere close to them. So I think we're about ready to be wrapping up. These are just some final thoughts. Be kind to yourself, help maintain those social connections, keep moving in whatever shape or form you can. I didn't talk a lot about nutrition, I normally do, but to really eat food that helps you to feel good, making time for yourself, again, staying focused on the present, reaching out to any of your healthcare providers, and to really find ways to help someone else out. You're all probably doing way better than you think, and to really kind of give yourself some slack is super important during this time. So I think that's going to wrap it up. Thank you all for listening.
Amy, thank you. Truly an amazing presentation. You have just offered us so much to consider and to think about. And that poem, wow, that was incredible.
Isn't that a great poem? Yes.
I hope I will make a few connections to some of the information you shared. And one of our participants wrote in how much she appreciated joining in, because this is helping lessen her isolation. We can keep you connected 3 days a week. Mindfulness Monday, you just heard Amy talk about that. Krista Ellis, one of my colleagues, does an amazing job. Come and learn about mindfulness every Monday with us. And Wellness Wednesdays, come back each Wednesday for one of these. And Fitness Friday. We will have all this information to you. You don't have to worry about writing anything down. You will get everything in an email following this. Including, I wanted to mention, and I'm just holding this up as a prop, Amy also put together a resource list for you. It has the information about one I want to pursue, the comediansoncall.org. That sounds phenomenal. Podcast, books. There's so much here that you can pursue, and you will get this resource list as well. So Amy, thank you again. The strategy is just tremendous. Let's take a few questions now and see where we are. You mentioned in terms of mental health and feeling like needing that kind of support. Someone asked about how do you even find a therapist or a counselor? We have viewers from across the country, perhaps even some international. How do you suggest somebody finds a counselor?
Yeah, that's a great question. It varies obviously a lot by region. I'm afraid the mental health system, at least in the US, is still relatively fragmented at times. So a couple of general ideas. Sometimes starting with if you have a primary care doctor or an internist, often reaching out to them to see if they have therapists or counselors in the area that they can refer you to. That's often a good resource. If you have medical insurance, actually your insurance provider is actually another good person to reach out to, because they actually then are going to have providers that are accept your insurance, which is important. They're going to have a list of providers that are accepting new patients, which is another important thing. And so I think those are some good resources. If you're seeing a neurologist, depending maybe on the size of the clinic or not, they may also have some good options for you. I don't know, like if you call the Parkinson's helpline, that Nancy, would that probably maybe be another option? The thing I'll say about that is that people will often say to me, well, yeah, I can go see this person, but they don't know anything about Parkinson's disease, right? And you know what? That's really not super important. Okay. They can always call and get information about Parkinson's disease. What's really going to set you up in terms of a good counseling or therapy experience, you have to feel comfortable with your counselor. Okay. So I might have all the knowledge in the world about Parkinson's disease, but if you don't feel like you can relate to me or feel comfortable, it's not going to mean anything. So I try to tell people to keep an open mind about that, not feel like they have to only be seen by somebody that knows about Parkinson's or has seen people with Parkinson's. At the end of the day, it's really that connection and what your relationship's like.
Absolutely. So yeah, excellent recommendations. And Amy, unfortunately, we're running out of time. So one last quick question. Someone asked about motivation and trying to help her husband improve his dietary habits, perhaps, made worse by COVID. Any comments about dietary improvements, motivation?
Yes. Keep your expectations small and manage your expectations, okay? Eating is one of our pleasures, right? And I know people have been back and forth with their COVID-19, meaning their 19 pounds that they've gained during COVID. Other people who have really stepped up to the challenge and have lost weight. I think it's really tough. You can't really, I don't think, really make people want to eat things that they like you want to, and you come from a good place with it. But at the end of the day, I think it's really hard to get people. All you can do is kind of set the example, right? And hope that people might catch on. But it's a tough one. Yeah.
So let me just quickly interject, because I think there are questions we're not going to get to, but I'll remind everybody about Wellness Wednesdays for November. We have a special focus on caregivers. So keep that in mind, everybody. And Amy and I have put together one last poll for everyone. We hope that by taking a look at this poll, and it will be launched here in just a second, thinking about all that Amy shared with us, what are the things on this list that you think you'd like to commit to in terms of striving and living and getting through all of this? Some great examples here and strategies for you to be well aware of and utilize. So while we're waiting for the poll results, once again, Amy, thank you so very much. You have been such pleasure, such a great source of information for us to have. And I can't wait to have you again as another guest, another speaker.
Thank you. Yes, it's been a joy.
Wow. So. Oh, laugh some more.
Well, interesting.
Fabulous. I think you're going to have an onslaught for comedians on call here.
Maybe, yes, absolutely.
Okay, so thank you again. And we're going to wrap up right now. And as I mentioned, there are a lot of things. If we didn't get to your questions, you can certainly call our helpline. You're going to see that number in just a minute. But I want to remind you, next Wednesday, please come back for the next Wellness Wednesday, which will be Caregiving from Afar. Another wonderful speaker from, I don't think I mentioned Amy's from our Center of Excellence here in Rochester, but that Andrea Gonzalez from the University of California, who Amy might know perhaps.
Yes.
She will be speaking next week. So please come back for that. And in summary, please call us, connect with us, sign up for our programs. You can find anything you need. If you have questions, someone asked about the PD generation link, call our helpline. It probably was put in the chat, but you can get that information from our helpline as well. 1-800 4PD-INFO. And that also translates to 1-800-473-4636. And our website is a huge resource of information and helping you connect with local resources. If you're wondering what your chapter is, parkinson.org/chapter. That will help you find it. So I think that does it. One more slide or not? I think maybe we're done. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're so thrilled that you were with us. Thank you, Amy, and look forward to seeing everyone stay connected, stay well. Thank you.
Absolutely. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.